your next album is taking shape, and
Yep.
you got into the studio. And so
I
I want
did
to hear a little
finally.
bit about that. Yeah.
Finally
So,
got into the studio.
yeah.
Well, it's 3 times. It's the third time that I tried making this album. And the very first time I broke my neck. Like literally. That's when that was February of 2020. Is shortly thereafter, like March of 2020 is when I started recording. And what I didn't realize was that in February, I broke my neck, but I didn't know it. I knew I was injured, but I didn't know it was broken. And so in March, when I went in to start recording music, I tried to sing and nothing would come out. I had vocal paralysis. So speaking like this, just at this low tone of voice and this very relaxed way to use your vocal cords was fine. But as soon as I pressured those vocal cords, the vocal folds to actually push music through or singing, they just stopped working, and it freaked me out because I was literally standing in front of a microphone and I went and nothing came out.
Oh, man.
And that's actually why I went to the doctor. I was like, something is wrong. Like I've lost the ability to sing. And they did an x-ray and they said, I will always remember this moment because the doctor was standing behind the x-ray screen and he says, "Oh shit."
Yeah. You don't want to hear that.
Not what you want to hear from a doctor.
Uh,
Yeah. And I was like, and so I leaned over, I was like, "Hey, that's not really what I wanted to hear. What's up?" And he says, "Well, when did you break your neck?" And I instantly knew, oh my God, I broke it in February. And so basically the inflammation and then the bone growth, the bone spur that came from the break in my neck had pinched off the nerves that control that part.
so
And
did
so
he
anyway,
have to re-break it to fix it, or
no, I
I
had
guess you couldn't really
traction.
do that, not with your neck.
No, exactly. No, I did a bunch of therapy. I did a bunch of traction, and a bunch of like physical therapy stuff, and eventually was able to open that channel up to where the nerves could do what they're supposed to do. And then I had to learn to sing again.
And you can sing again. Wow.
Yeah, and it took quite a while to get the muscle control back and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was the first time I tried recording. The second time I went into the studio with a whole bunch of great musicians, excellent musicians. And we were in the studio for 3 days working on this music. And in 3 days, we didn't get a single song done, not even one. And the vibe just, whatever that thing that needs to gel when people make music together, it just wasn't there. And I knew all these guys and I had played music with all these guys. And I just get the feeling like almost supernaturally that it just wasn't the right time. To have all these great musicians and all of us just kind of looking at each other going, something's not coming together. This doesn't feel right. So literally at the end of the 3 days, we all just kind of went, this just isn't working. No offense to any of us, because we're all, good at what we do. But it just wasn't happening. And so I spent a chunk of money on that studio time and, only to find out that I got nothing from it. So I kind of put the album on the back shelf for a while, on the back burner. And I had a buddy of mine reach out to me and he's like, "Man, it's just been so long since you put out music." Cause I haven't put out an album since 2017. And he said, "You got to get in the studio and get some new music made." And I was like, "Yeah, man, I've tried a couple of times and it's not coming together." And so I was at lunch with a buddy of mine who is a tremendously talented musician who makes completely different style of music. He's actually a funk and R&B artist. And I was just telling him, "Man, I really would like to make some new music, but it just hasn't come together." And he and I were talking about, he said, "Well, what would you think about making a funk and R&B album? Because I could make one of those with you." And I was like, "That'd be a ton of fun. Let's do that." So we sat down over the course of a couple of meetings and played some songs and everything. And he kept coming back to these songs that I was going to put on the previous album, the one that wasn't coming together. He's like, "Man, I really want to make those songs instead." And I was like, "Oh, dude, that's not even your style." He's like, "Yeah, but I really want the opportunity to do it. And I really love these songs way more than the funk and R&B stuff we're doing. I think we need to make this album." And I said, "Well, if you think you got it in you, if you want to get together and give it a shot, let's get together and give it a shot." So I went ahead and booked the studio time, and man, it was just awesome. It was unbelievable how cool it was. And part of it, I think, maybe was bringing in musicians that I hadn't worked with before, that come from a different background, that play different kinds of music. And not that we put out a funk and R&B album by any stretch of the imagination, but we put out a rock album. So the other couple of things that I've put out have been sort of country leaning. And this one doesn't sound like country at all. This one came out, and maybe that's what the problem was before when I was trying to make it, is it's like, just the universe telling me we don't, it's not time for another country album. It's time to put out a rock album. So we put together all together. No, we didn't record all these. We recorded 5 songs, but all together I've got 12 songs that will eventually be, I think, on the full release. So this will be an EP. This will be like 5 songs that'll be available late this year. And I'll probably release a couple of singles from that along the way of just letting people know what it sounds like and getting people prepared that it sounds different than what it did before. But I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. And so you went from 3 days with no songs to 1 day and 5 songs.
Yeah.
So I guess it was time. So,
yeah, that's how we got together. It was really funny. We were going over one of the songs that we couldn't quite figure out what we wanted to do. And we came to the realization that the song was based on a drum beat. Like that's what this song needs to be. It needs to be based around a cool drum beat. And the drummer, we're like, man, what do we do? What do we do? We're kicking around these ideas, and the drummer just sits back and he goes, I got it.
Wow.
and like he literally just walked over to the drums. He goes, it sounds like this. And we're like, yes, that's what it sounds like, right? So there was a lot of those moments. I call them goosebump moments. And that's what was going wrong last time we tried to record, is like everything just felt like drudgery. It felt like work. Like, okay, do it again. Okay, do it again. No, that didn't feel right. Do it again. And with the last 2 albums that I made in the past, there were so many goosebump moments where we're like, somebody comes up with an idea. We're like, oh my God, that's it right there. Let's do that. And I was looking for those goosebump moments, and there were Gesundheit.
No, excuse me.
There were countless goosebump moments last Thursday when we were in the studio. So yeah, we recorded 5 songs in 1 day. And then the next day,
thrills along the way too, right? Because I remember you said your lead guitarist quit the day before.
Yeah. The guy that was going to play guitar just up, and he said, man, I got too many things going on. I can't make it tomorrow. We're like, it's tomorrow. He's like, oh, I got to teach these lessons. I just can't take the time out to do it. So my friend Chris Watson is the guy who's producing it with me. He said, well, man, we've got to have a guitar player. He said, we're just gonna have to send this to somebody afterward. And I said, I don't want to send it to somebody afterward. I want a guitar player right there where we can all bounce ideas off each other, because it's that synergy that I'm looking for. And I think I told you about that. All the guitar players I know are country style guitar players, and I didn't want to do country. And so I said, man, I just need a young guy that plays like modern rock. And all of a sudden, Chris goes, I know the guy that can do that. And he's in Dallas. So he's only, an hour away. And I don't know if he'll be available at last minute's notice or not, but I can sure text him and try and call in a favor. And so sure enough, it was probably less than 3 minutes. He texted me back and said, he's in, he'll be here tomorrow. So there were some magical moments where stuff just came together. And once we got in there, I felt like it was the right thing to do. I felt like everything came together. And then the last day that we were there, which was, again, we were only there for 2 days. So last Friday, we were going to track all of the organ parts, the electric piano, the piano, and then all the vocals. And I was like, man, I don't know if I can do 5 songs, because when you record, you typically sing these things 10 times in a row. Mm-hmm. So I was like, man, I don't know if I can track 5 songs vocally in 1 day. And they said, you can do this. You can do this. Just, well, you don't have to say anything else. We'll only focus on the vocals, and we'll have all of the warm tea and honey ready for you and everything. And so we got everything done. And I was really pleased. There was one song, it's that one that you know about that I wrote for my daughter, mm-hmm. that Chris is actually a highly trained professional piano and keys player. That's what he does for a living. That's all he does for a living, is he plays with big name bands and he plays the piano. And so he's exceptionally good, and I'm exceptionally not most of the time. But
well, I think you sound good, but okay.
I
know that's a musician thing, right?
It is, and I had to work on that. I had to work on that lack of self-confidence, because when you're in the studio with people that are just, top notch, it can have a tendency to make you feel like a bit of a hack. And so we sat down to record one of them, and he starts playing the piano, And we were like, let's try something different. And the guy who was the studio engineer, he said, Dan, why don't you sit down and go play that song the way that you wrote it? And let's just listen to it that way. And I sat down, and literally everybody in the studio just went, that's it. That's exactly what the song's supposed to sound like. And so I honestly didn't plan on playing piano for that song because Chris is such an accomplished keys player, but it felt really good to have the group sit there and go, man, that's what that song needs to sound like. So anyway, I ended up playing piano on that one and another one, where in the past, well, I guess on the Hemingway album, I played one song on the piano. But typically I bring in like a really top-notch piano player who's 10 times better than me on the talent scale, on the skill scale. But it just reminded me that if you measure yourself on a linear scale of, say, skill or talent, right? You have one person who is, let's say, a 0, just can't do it at all. Like me playing basketball. Don't even hand me a basketball, I'll embarrass myself. And then on the other hand, you have Michael Jordan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you measure yourself on the scale of that, most of us are going to fall pretty far short. And it's the same kind of thing with musical talent. When you're into a creative pursuit like that, or like writing, it's not a linear scale that you can compare yourself from one person to the next, because creative pursuits are so different that it's almost like I envisioned it like a disc or like a sphere, maybe, where your talent, your skill, your creativity, all of that stuff is contained in this thing that looks kind of like an album. And what goes on that album is unique to you. And so maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, compared to a master piano player, maybe I'm a 5, but when you blend it together with all those other things, it becomes a whole creation. It becomes a whole planar view. And I almost imagined like 2 of these things revolving around each other, so that when Chris and I were playing together, he would sit down at the organ and I would sit down at the piano. And when you put the 2 of those things together, a new magic happens that brings a beauty that maybe I couldn't have pulled off by myself, or maybe he couldn't have pulled off by himself. And it's odd the way that talents and gifts and creativity meet up. So it's a lot like, I think, when you and I started working on the books, like you brought me a book and I was like, man, this is a really freaking great book. And then we start working through characters and working through character voices and stuff, and everything grows in this new way. And I think that's the only way to get there, I think, is to be willing to match your talents up or meet them up with someone who does something differently than you do. I think that's it's like 1 and 1 makes 3 instead of 2,
Yeah, it's a team thing, right? So
yeah,
it's one thing for you to do it by yourself. It's another thing to pull in other people and get that energy.
Yeah.
And it's you mentioned basketball, and you could say, okay, Michael Jordan was the best, but he had Scottie Pippen and he had these other people around him that made his talent, that allowed him to express his talent in those ways that was very unique to the Chicago Bulls. And will always, and will always be thought of not just as Michael Jordan, but as this, and always remembered as this fantastic team that won all of these, awards and all these medals and went off to the Olympics and did all these incredible things, right?
Yeah. Well, and like you had this experience, I think, at Dell, that, even with all of the talent that you have, had it just been you, if you were to take, let's say there were 10 people on your team at Dell, and you divided up everything that you guys did, right, into multiples of 10, right? So let's say you did $1 billion in business or whatever. 10% of that might have been yours. But had it just been you without the team, you might have only gotten to 7% or 6%. It's like there is that synergy of collaboration and just motivating one another. And I was started thinking about that ever since I got out of the studio, that the things, whether it was in the business world or the creative world, the things that I've always been the most pleased with, that came out the best, always had a team around it. It doesn't matter how self-reliant you are or how talented an individual is. I think it's got to be almost never that something brilliant comes from just one person. I just listened to a podcast from Eric Weinstein, who's a brilliant thinker, Einstein level thinker. And he brought up that Albert Einstein, we think of like the theory of relativity as this, like he figured it out. Well, his best friend was a mathematician and Einstein was not. And so Einstein actually presented the theory of relativity 3 times. The first time it was completely screwed up, like nothing about it worked. The second time there was a major mathematical error in it. And only the third time did it actually come out into the theory of relativity that we all know that has become the basis of so much of modern physics. And the best friend, who was the top level mathematician, was the one working with him on it, saying, yeah, but there's a mistake here. Yeah, but did you think about it this way? And so even things I think a lot of times that we think of as solitary pursuits, it wouldn't be what it is without the teamwork, someone else there. And so
Steve
I've been
Jobs
thinking about
called
that.
it an A team, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll always remember. In fact, that's what happened to me at Dell. Is my best years at Dell, I had an A team around me. I had a genius technician and a genius front man, and I was the guy that was working between the techs and the salespeople because I could see both sides, and
yeah,
all of it was just working together, and we did incredible things because of that. And I always have remembered Steve. I read his book, and I've always
yeah,
remembered his focus on having an A team around him.
yeah,
Yeah, that was the most important thing. So
yeah,
my dad told me, he said, there's nothing more important than having good people around you. And if you find one, hold them tight because
yeah,
it's such
yeah,
a rare thing. It's not so easy. It took you 3 tries to get to the right gestalt and
yeah,
get an album done with a bunch of other people that then became your team. So
yeah, yeah. I think so.